continue seeing what the other paths are beyond that.
So with that, you developed your own sort of design aesthetic. Could you describe that for us?
I think eclectic is probably a good way to put a sort of cover over all of that. Normally what happens for me when I begin a design process is I'm not very good, and I totally embrace the designers out there who can say, I'm going to make something interesting out of doing nothing but a series of knit two together yarn over rows. And there are tons and tons of people who like to knit those projects, and I certainly like to knit them when I need kind of a break from something. But for me personally, what I like to have is to have some kind of backstory. What's the thing that I've looked at, listened to, read, experienced, whatever that might be, that I think, wow, that would be really interesting to see if I could translate that into a color work pattern, or figure out how to put stitch patterns together that tell that little microcosm story of something that's interested me. So if it's something that I am interested in, I mean, and it can be anything from, oh, that's a great new BBC series, to let's go on some vacation type trip. I mean, pre-COVID universe when we all actually left the house. Or some interesting color palette. One thing that I've been really interested in right now is I have an artist who I've been following who does watercolors. And everything she does is fantasy landscapes. It's like the landscape paintings of her inner mind. And she does sort of Rorschach blot test, like these very random watercolor pictures that she then finds like the pictures and the clouds in them. And so all of a sudden a rabbit appears because she's highlighted this little form with little dry brush paint fur, for instance. And her colors are so interesting because of course she doesn't set out to paint a rabbit. She just puts color on the paper and then she sort of sees what comes out of it for her. And so I've been thinking, well, wouldn't it be interesting to do a series of themed designs that match her color palettes with that theme that she's found in them, which would be something, you know, completely different than the art she's produced. But it's one of those things where I'm, you know, hitting her Instagram feed every morning to see what new things she's posted that might be something I'm interested in.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the people being creative. It's sometimes easier to create when you've got boundaries, some sort of I don't know, something that can corral what you're, you know, give you some form.
Agreed.
To it. So that would say that you do a lot of collections. I mean, every time I've talked to you, you've got Vikings and you've got fantasy, fairy tales, and you've got one right now that you're doing on Celtic alphabets.
Yes.
I think so. I've done homework, you see.
It's good.
So how do you, if you know you've got something, I mean, you mentioned earlier you had a design for some yarn company that you're, besides your own, that you're working on, and there is a deadline. I mean, it has to be done by a certain time. How do you set that routine up to make sure that it gets done by that time in a creative field?
Right. You know, to some extent, I think first off, what I would say is you have to embrace a little bit of that as being part of the challenge. What can I get done on this deadline? If you're not okay with the deadline, you probably should not be signing contracts with people to produce things.
Good point.
In a certain time.
Good point.
And there's totally nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's certainly, there's tons and tons of people who can be creative, but they, instead of say 6 weeks is my, like, I have to have a creative moment in 6 weeks or else, they say, well, if it takes 6 months, that's great. If it takes a year, that's great. And they're okay with that being their process. So I think first off, you have to accept the fact that if you are going to do things that are of a required deadline, you have to be okay to work within that structure. If you know that's not for you, it's not for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally fine. I basically have a process that I go through where, let's say that I see a proposal for something that I want to submit a design for.
Mm-hmm.
First, I look at that and I say, oh, okay, the finished piece has to be done July 4th. That's no problem. I've got space in my schedule between now and then. I could produce a thing. Once I go through that, I usually then take, if there's a call for a proposal that has a mood board, I obviously look at that because that's what they want. But beyond that, I will go and make my own Pinterest mood board. I have oodles and oodles of private mood boards sitting on Pinterest that
Mm-hmm.
are just stuff where I've found a lace trim I like on a ready-to-wear tunic. I toss that into my lace folder because it's interesting. But some other things too, like there was a whole series of photographs that I had to pull myself out of having 800 of them in this folder. They were all photographs of weeds with pictures taken during hoarfrost season.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all monochromatic with maybe a gray or sort of a sage green kind of tint to them. And they all were completely different because they were from various places and locations around the world. So some of them were sort of very dense leaves with hoarfrost. Some of them were like Monardia bee balm type flowers
Mm-hmm.
with hoarfrost on them. So I will take things like that, which don't seem to be related necessarily to anything, and put them into a folder. In this case, this was my lace folder.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were some motifs in there that I thought I could develop a chart from that, and at some point pull that particular motif out to suit this theme. So I know a lot of people say, oh, I have to put a timer on my social media. I can't sit on Instagram for 3 hours a day. That's just not helpful. I actually sort of disagree with that because I feel like I mean, not to say this is my justification for surfing the web, but there's so many things out there that you can get a good visual reference for in terms of, different sites, especially now that the museums are putting a lot of things that are in their storage collections out on the web that you can search for, or just, go wander through their collection. It's your virtual field trip for the day. So I do spend a lot of front end time going through things, looking at things that intrigue me or interest me, and trying to sort them into my own personal file folders, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Because then if I am working on a deadline type moment, I know that there's fodder somewhere in there. And I can say, oh, let me go and look in here and see what's interesting and what's interesting to me for this particular topic. The other thing that I have found about myself, and this kind of goes back to the nothing but a row of yarn over knit two together,
Mm-hmm.
I need to be able to be interested in the project in order to make sure I meet my deadlines. I have to be very vested in it. There's been some things that, Interweave has a call out for a specific design for their fall collection. And I think to myself, wow, that's a really interesting concept. But it's not really me. It's not my thing. So that's probably not a good one to pick. And usually they have, 4 different stories or so in each issue. And so, maybe one of the 4 I'm interested in, but I probably wouldn't find a perfect match for all 4.
Yeah. Now, would you get strategic and think that maybe not too many people other designers are going to submit to one of the 4 and choose that one with hopes that you'll get in because of that?
I don't really sort it that way. I tend to think that, and I don't know if this is a truth or not because I have no feedback from the editors on this concept, but I tend to think that because I often don't think of a design project linearly from the prompt, that chances are good that whatever weird little esoteric tidbit has interested me is probably not going to be the same path some other designer has chosen. And so if I can present a sketch with a design and the swatch with my story behind how it fits that prompt, that's likely to be unique enough that they would at least give it another look. And so to me, that helps move it to the top of their stack.
That's good. What happens if you get stuck? What happens, you know, like the knitting designer's equivalent to writer's block? Or do you?
I don't very often, but when I do, this is going to sound insane, but we're all friends here. What I normally do is I will design something that's just for me. Meaning I won't design the whole thing. I mean, I'm not going to go into numbers, and I'm not going to have fleshed out the whole thing, because again, we're talking about a deadline. But I will say, okay, what was it about this idea that I really loved? And my husband and I have this standing joke. I found this t-shirt online. It's just a plain gray t-shirt, and the only thing it says on it is epic. And I want that so badly, because like if I'm left to my own desires, I want the epic project that has 52 colors, and you're doing like lace with Fair Isle, and then a multiple set of decreases all at once, you know, while reading French and like brewing the best cup of cappuccino ever simultaneously. So I pick that project for myself. And then I take a third of it away. A third of the complexity, a third of the details. And then I take another third of it away. And then usually whatever's left in that final third is kind of the essence of a commercial pattern that I would still find interesting to design and to want to make. And so from there, I can usually then say, okay, this will fit. I can be content with moving forward, and this now has a plan and a path. I'm never going to submit that epic version for consideration, because, you know, there's like 2 people in the world who would knit it. And the instructions are an entire book worth of charts.
Wait, that's what I do.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, thank you. No.
But, you know, from a commercial perspective, if I'm looking at, you know, what is the goal that I'm trying to achieve to tell this design story in a way that, again, more than 2 people would be interested in trying to tackle it. And that usually helps jumpstart me enough to say, okay, you know, let me at least get started, and let me work through the technical ends of it to make sure I can make this work.
Yeah. Well, so if you had that fantasy project, and I guess I should jump in here, you do a lot of shawls, you do socks, you do sweaters, you do color work, you do lace, you do some cables. I haven't seen you do mostly twisted stitches around. Just so you can, I'm trying to visualize your hoarfrost into what it would come up to be as.
So if I was going to do something with that concept of all those little weeds with frost on them, I actually, there's a painting that I love. I can't remember the artist's name, but she's Russian. Anyway, it's winter, basically winter stepping into fall. And so the figure in it has a sort of autumnal forest surrounding her, but behind her, she's got the train of her very fancy dress that's basically covering the ground with snow. And as it goes, she's got that sort of draping over things. So I could see something that was in that same vein, that was a lot of lace, maybe an overlay with tons of beads, that was like a full-length dress.
Yeah. Sounds lovely. Just lovely. Well, we are
concept shoot.
We are getting to the point that Frances is going to send us notes, but I have somewhere in here, I have what I call the lightning round. Okay. This is just fast answers, and because as you know, my eyes are still dilated from the doctor's office, so I had to take a picture of my notes so I can blow them up big on my phone so I can actually see them. So, fast answers. Favorite needles and why?
I actually don't have favorite needles. I like metal for lace and I like wood for cables, but beyond that, I don't care.
Western or continental?
Continental.
Favorite or go-to decrease?
Knit two together.
Favorite or go-to increase?
Backward loop, cast on.
Oh, nice. Okay. Small circumferences, DPN, magic loop, two circs.
Two circs.
Way to go. I knew we were doing go-to color. If you were just doing something for you and you just go-to color.
Gray.
Oh, interesting. Go-to stitch markers. Little circles, little squares, little.
Just the little jump rings.
Yeah.
With a bead usually.
Yeah. Okay. Charting program.
Why can I never remember it?
Envision Knit, creative knit.
It's Envision Knit.
Is Envision Knit?
Envision Knit.
Yeah, that's the one I used to. Flat or in the round?
In the round.
Custom, or what does that word say? It does say custom knit bag or Ziploc.
Kind of both. I have a nasty looking Ziploc inside the attractive custom knit bag because I have to keep my street cred, you know.
I like that. Favorite Harry Potter character?
Oh, Hermione.
Okay. I'm kind of a Ginny Weasley. I'm going towards Ginny Weasley. Audiobooks or hold a book?
Hold a book.
Okay. Star Wars, Star Trek?
Star Wars.
Okay. Frances, I am done. Thank you.
Okay. I love your description of how you get your ideas and the Pinterest and whatnot, but you use the phrase mood board. What's a mood board?
So a lot of times when you have a proposal come to you, but you can certainly always do this for yourself, is to choose some images that represent whatever theme or concept it is that you want to also let someone in on the secret, if you will. So for interest, for example, let's say that you wanted to do a design collection that was based on trains. So you might have images of old-fashioned locomotives. You might have some of the vistas where you've got the train tracks that disappear off into the distance. You might have ones where the train is passing through a landscape, or maybe historical photos that show train engineers or the gentleman who shoveled the coal in for the steam, or maybe some pictures of the Hogwarts Express, to pull another Harry Potter reference there. So you would put all of those together and be able to have them have some kind of consistent feel to them. So let's say if you had all historic photos, or you had all ones of a train passing through a fall foliage in the mountains. So the mood board is trying not only to tell somebody in a visual sense what the theme is, but it's also there to evoke some kind of sort of background emotion or feel that you're trying to convey with those images as a whole.
And they, you know, sometimes they may be all historical. You might have some people in conductors' uniforms with hats and you know, that kind of thing, the old-fashioned kind, or you might have a slick monorail that, you know, has people all dressed in sort of space kind of things. Lots of times you'll see they'll have a winter theme or winter bride theme, and they'll have just a bunch of clips of things just to kind of give you the idea, not to say make this sweater or make this hat. It'll just kind of give you the feel for it.
Okay, good. I'm going to unmute everyone, and if anyone else has any questions or any comments, I think I have unmuted you. You may have muted yourself, but you can unmute yourself too. So.
Well, I know I'm inspired. I'm always inspired when I listen to Anne. So I'm always
thank you,
thrilled. I mean, it's always fascinating to me how you take just, you know, a concept and then go really deep into it and come up with all these things to go with it. Can you quickly tell us, Anne, how you get your models? And you know what story I want to hear.
Sure. I am very fortunate that we have a fairly brisk modeling community here. I live in New Mexico, by the way. I'm not in Albuquerque, but close enough. So I have a number of contacts who are in the modeling industry in Albuquerque, which is fairly small, which is nice because it means that you can actually contact someone and get them to contact you back, as opposed to, let's say, LA or New York, where no one wants to talk to a knitwear designer. They just don't. But yes, there was a gentleman who modeled for me, who I saw a picture of him at one of the local volcanic craters, which live near us here in the mountains in New Mexico, and thought he would be absolutely perfect for my Viking collection. And so I shot him a message on Messenger and just said, could we do this? Would you like to be in this photo shoot and be a Viking for me? And he very nicely said yes. So he wound up being kind of the muse for one of the sweaters I designed, because it's got a Fair Isle motif of a raven on it, which actually matches the tattoo he has on his arm of that exact same motif that stretches this whole part of his forearm. So that's where it is on the design as well. And he was super, super great to work with. He looks like a Viking raider. He's a fitness model.
You need to go out to Ravelry and see this guy. He is fabulous. He's got the beard and the whole. This is wonderful.
And he's a college professor, so he's very well spoken, well read, super nice guy. But you would never know it to look at him doing his Viking thing. So I think someone had a question about sizing, but I didn't see the whole thing before it disappeared off my screen.
How many sizes do you typically include in a pattern?
I usually, unless there's some specific, like Interweave Press had a certain number that you had to include, and that was all they wanted. I usually try for 8. If it's something that's a unisex piece, I wind up trying to usually add in a 9th size, because then that covers me from sort of teen sizes all the way up into the 50 plus. And sometimes the design drives a little of that. If it's a pattern that has a very wide stitch repeat, meaning there's like a big chunky cable in the center, or the Fair Isle pattern is large, there may be less sizes for it because it's harder to break that down into units. And someone had a question as well about color work, I think.
Mm-hmm. What is color work?
So color work is a larger term that talks about any time that you're using more than one color. Technically, stripes is color work. What most people are referring to as color work would be what we consider stranded knitting or Fair Isle knitting, or one of the Norwegian techniques where you're working with 2 colors in 2 or more colors within one row of knitting or one round of knitting. So you're alternating colors back and forth and reading off of a chart that indicates how those colors make up a motif within the design.
Would you agree that that Fair Isle and the Norwegian stuff is a form of stranded color work?
Yes,
okay.
I would.
Thank you.
Go there.
So color work is a broad name that includes lots of different techniques.
Correct, but I think most people, many knitters use it interchangeably. Color work and Fair Isle, this is like the college SAT question, right? Fair Isle is a type of color work not all color work is Fair Isle, but I think a lot of people use those terms somewhat interchangeably because that's what they've been introduced to in terms of when people describe color work, they're thinking of a stranded knitting technique.
Mostly Great Britain, I've heard it early on. It would color work was Fair Isle or any other type of stranded. And Fair Isle is just a part, and Fair Isle has specific. It's what I do. I'm sorry, specific motifs that make it be color work, make it be Fair Isle work.
We have another question here. Do you have a favorite design that you have published?
Wow. That's like asking if I have a favorite kid, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say the Salt River pullover, which is in my book that I did for Interweave. I loved almost everything about that design. It's based on horses. It's based on wild horses. So right there, I'm totally on board. It is twisted stitches and cable. It's in a great tweedy kind of traditional type yarn in a color I love. I love the fit of it. Yeah, I'd say probably that one if I had to pick.
Good. Any other questions from anyone? This has just been great. Thank you, Anne, so much for your time.
Your time. Sure.
It's
my
really
pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fun to hear. I don't know about you guys, but let's just give her a thank you.
Yay!